I want to build columns in the CMS like this, so I'm going to create a component for that. Head over to our index page and let's cut the column section we built previously. Then create a new component called b-grid-1. Start a component boilerplate and paste the code. I only need one column because I'm going to use a v-for loop to iterate through an array of columns. So in the component script, I'll set a prop for columns, and we expect that to be an array. I also need to name this new component. Now I can head back to the index page, import the new grid component, and use vbind to bind an object called grid, which will include all of my columns. Let's write that out. So I'll have an object called grid, which contains an array of columns, and I want 3 columns, which should specify a width. Hit save, and there we go. Now let's deal with the content within our columns. I'd like to handle content like this within a rich text field within the CMS, so let's create that component. I'll call it c-richtext-1. You could argue it should be a block, but I'll keep it as a component for now. Let me just get our boilerplate in here. I need to name this component. Most CMSs give you a WYSIWYG field or a rich text field that returns HTML. So I'll set a prop called content where I expect to get that HTML as a string. Let's get rid of our placeholder markup and use the v-html directive to interpret content as HTML. I will also use the text component class from Codyhouse to style the HTML. Then head back to our grid component, bind an object to the rich text component called rich text. I'll import the rich text component and use it in my grid. And just to make sure it's working, I will create that rich text object with the content string, hit save, and it works. So we've now got a grid that renders a number of columns and a rich text component, but what if I want something other than rich text in my column? This is where dynamic components come in. Vue has this built-in component which can represent any other component we want it to. All you do is pass the name of a component into this is attribute and the data for that component through vbind. Now instead of hard coding our rich text component, let's instead pass in a component with the name of our rich text component. To make sure it's working, I'll update the content, and now you can see we're loading our rich text component from a Vue dynamic component, which is really cool. Our column data shouldn't live within the grid, it's going to come from the index page, so let's move it there. Each column will get a component array, and inside will be our rich text component. And notice that the components array could contain more than one component. So let's go back to our grid, and on the dynamic component, we need to use a v-for loop. In this v-for loop, I will iterate over each component within the column components. I'd like to break each of these onto their own line at this point, so this is a bit more readable. When you save this, it works, but you'll notice an error in the console about not having a key in your v-for loop. Thankfully, v-for supports a second argument here for the index of the current item. And I'll just go ahead and use that index on the key attribute. View is now satisfied. Last but not least, I need to control the width of my columns. So on the columns class, I will use concatenation once again to pass in the column.width. Back in index, I'll change the width of my first two columns, perhaps get rid of the last, and there we have it. A completely dynamic grid component. In the next video, we will create a quick and easy feature block.